My brother stood up at my parents' 40th anniversary party, champagne glass raised, and announced to a room full of 100 guests that I had always been the failure of the family. I felt my fiancé Josh's hand tighten around mine under the table as Derek continued, his voice carrying across the country club ballroom, explaining in vivid detail why this meant he deserved to inherit everything: the house, the savings, the whole estate. My face burned as relatives I hadn't seen in years turned to stare. Josh leaned close and whispered, "Don't react. Trust me." I couldn't have moved if I'd wanted to, but it wasn't my frozen horror that made the moment stretch into something else entirely. It was my mother's face. Patricia, always composed, always diplomatic, always smoothing things over, had gone completely, utterly blank. And that's when I knew something was about to detonate. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. To understand what happened at that party, you need to understand how my family works. Derek is 3 years older than me, and from the moment he was born, the sun rose and set on whatever he wanted. I'm not exaggerating. When we were kids, his bedroom was twice the size of mine because he needed space for his projects. His projects were half-built model cars he'd abandon after a week. But sure, he needed space. I was the easy one, the one who got good grades without being asked, who never missed curfew, who helped mom with dinner without being told. You'd think that would earn some recognition, but being low maintenance in my family just meant you were low priority. Derek got a BMW for his 16th birthday. I bought my own Honda Civic at 22, with money I'd saved from 2 jobs. When Derek announced he was dropping out of college junior year to start a tech company, Dad called it entrepreneurial vision and wrote him a check for $50,000. The company folded in 8 months. When I graduated summa cum laude and got into a master's program, Dad asked if I really needed more school and suggested I start contributing to the household instead. I put myself through grad school with loans and night shifts at a restaurant. Derek started 2 more businesses after that. Both failed. Both were funded by my parents, who kept insisting he just needed to find his footing. Meanwhile, I became a teacher, bought my own apartment, paid off my loans ahead of schedule, and never asked them for a dime. Somehow, in the family narrative, Derek was the one with ambition and potential. I was just there, steady, boring. Emma, who always figured things out on her own, so why would she need help? It's funny how being self-sufficient gets treated like it's a character flaw instead of something to be proud of. The pattern was everywhere once you knew to look for it. I already mentioned the car situation, but let me tell you about Derek's wedding. He married his college girlfriend when he was 27, and my parents paid for the entire thing. $80,000. Open bar, orchestra, destination rehearsal dinner in Napa, the works. It was featured in a local magazine. When I got engaged to Josh last year, Mom took me to lunch and gently suggested we keep things simple, since we were both established adults who should stand on our own feet. The irony of that phrase coming from her after bankrolling Derek's life for 35 years was not lost on me. But I smiled and said, of course, we were planning something intimate anyway. Every family gathering operated on the same principle. Derek's needs came first. Thanksgiving, scheduled around Derek's availability. Christmas morning, delayed until Derek decided to show up, usually around noon. When I hosted dinner at my apartment once, Derek showed up 2 hours late. And Mom spent the entire time before he arrived asking if maybe we should wait to eat. We waited. My food was dry and cold by the time he strolled in without apology. But the real pattern was in how they talked about us. Derek's third business failure was described as bad timing in the market and learning experiences that would serve him well. When I mentioned being up for department chair at my school, Dad said, "That's nice, sweetie," and immediately changed the subject to ask if anyone had heard about Derek's new cryptocurrency venture. Spoiler, that one failed too. At family dinners, Derek would dominate conversations with stories about his ideas, his contacts, his potential. I could cure cancer, and it would get less airtime than Derek's opinion on blockchain. And if I ever seemed bothered by it, I was being sensitive, jealous. You know your brother needs extra support, Mom would say, as if being coddled for 35 years wasn't enough support, as if I didn't need anything at all. The past year, though, something shifted. Derek's third business, some kind of consulting firm that I never fully understood, completely imploded. I'm talking lawsuits, angry clients, the whole disaster. He lost his apartment, his car got repossessed, and at 35 years old, he moved back into my parents' house. Into his childhood bedroom with the posters still on the walls. You'd think this might be a moment of humility, of self-reflection. You'd be wrong. Instead, Derek started making comments about how I wasn't helping family enough. At Sunday dinners, he'd make little digs about how some people care more about their own lives than supporting their relatives through hard times. He said this while eating food Mom cooked in a house he wasn't paying rent for, surrounded by furniture Dad bought. The audacity was breathtaking. What made it worse was that I had helped him. 3 years ago, when his second business was struggling, Derek called me in tears. Actual tears. He said he was going to lose everything, that he just needed a bridge loan to get through a rough patch, that he'd pay me back within 6 months. I gave him $15,000. It was most of my savings at the time. I never saw a penny of it back. When I brought it up once, gently, Derek looked at me like I'd spit on him. I can't believe you're keeping score, he said. That's what's wrong with you, Emma. You treat family like a transaction. This, from the man who owed me 15 grand. But now, living at home and spiraling, Derek had apparently decided that I was the selfish one, that my crime wasn't giving him money I'd never see again. It was not giving him more. Mom and Dad never corrected him. They'd nod sympathetically when he complained about how hard it was, that nobody understood what he was going through. I wanted to scream that I understood perfectly. I understood that he'd been handed everything his entire life and still managed to fail. But I didn't say that. I kept the peace, like always. I met Josh 18 months ago at a teacher conference. He's a high school counselor, which means he's professionally trained to spot dysfunction, and spot it he did. Our third date, I casually mentioned I couldn't do dinner on Sunday because of family obligation. Every Sunday? He asked. Every Sunday, I confirmed. And you can't miss one? The way he said it, like it was a genuine question and not just how life worked, made me pause. I'd never really thought about it. That was the first crack in the wall. The real moment came 3 months in when he joined me for Sunday dinner. He watched Derek show up 45 minutes late, watched my parents fawn over him anyway, watched my dad ask Derek about his prospects, while barely acknowledging that I'd just won a teaching award. On the drive home, Josh was quiet. Finally, he said, "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really hear me. Do you notice how they treat you?" I got defensive immediately. "They're just like that," I said. "Derek's going through a hard time. They don't mean anything by it." Josh pulled over. "Your mom asked you to give up your seat so Derek could sit at the head of the table in your childhood home, and you did it without even blinking." I hadn't even noticed. That's how automatic it was. Josh started pointing things out. The way Dad interrupted me but never Derek. The way my accomplishments got a "that's nice," while Derek's ideas got full family discussions. The way I apologized for things that weren't my fault. "They've gaslit you your whole life into thinking you're less important," Josh said. "And you've accepted it as normal." He didn't push me to cut them off or cause drama. He just encouraged boundaries. Small ones at first. "Try saying no to one Sunday dinner. See what happens." I did. Mom called me 3 times asking if I was okay, if I was mad at them, if something was wrong. When I said I just needed a week to myself, she said, "Well, Derek will be disappointed." Not her. Derek. That's when I started to see it. Really see it. Josh didn't turn me against my family. He just helped me realize I'd been living in a fog for 32 years. 6 months before the anniversary party, I decided to try. Josh had been gently encouraging me, and I'd been in therapy for a few months working up the courage. I invited my parents to lunch without Derek, just the three of us, which was unusual enough that Mom asked twice if everything was okay. Over salads neither of them touched, I tried to explain how I felt. I kept it calm, used I statements like my therapist suggested. I said I sometimes felt overlooked, that the difference in how they'd supported Derek versus me had been painful, that I wanted to feel more valued in the family. I thought I was being so reasonable. My dad's face went red before I even finished. "So you're keeping score now," he said, "after everything we've done for you?" Everything they'd done for me. I tried to list what that was exactly, but Mom cut me off. "Emma, this is very hurtful. We've always loved you equally. The fact that you'd even suggest otherwise is incredibly divisive." Divisive. That word hung in the air. "Your brother is struggling," they added. "He needs more support right now. When you were struggling, we were there for you too." I wanted to ask when exactly I'd been struggling in a way they'd noticed, when they'd offered help I hadn't asked for. But Mom's eyes were getting watery, and she was doing that thing where she pressed her fingers to her temples like I was giving her a migraine. "I think you've been spending too much time listening to Josh," she said quietly. "He doesn't understand our family." Of course they'd make it about Josh. Derek somehow heard about the lunch. Mom must have told him, and called me that night. "I can't believe you'd attack Mom and Dad like that," he said, "after everything they've sacrificed for us. You're so ungrateful, Emma. You've always had this victim complex." I apologized. I actually apologized to him, said I didn't mean it that way, that I was just having a hard time and took it out on them unfairly. He accepted my apology like a king granting mercy. I went back to Sunday dinners, kept the peace, swallowed it all down. Josh held me while I cried that night and said, "You tried. That's what matters." But I felt like a failure, again. 2 months before that disastrous party, my parents announced they wanted to celebrate their 40th anniversary with something special. A big party, they said. A real celebration. I immediately offered to help plan. I'm good at organizing. It's literally part of my job as a teacher. Plus, I figured this might be a way to contribute, to feel included in something meaningful. Mom smiled and patted my hand. "That's sweet, honey, but Derek's already offered to handle everything. You know how he is with these big projects." Derek, who couldn't handle his own life, was going to plan a party for 100 people. Sure. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. A week later, Mom called me. Had Derek mentioned the venue to me? No? Well, could I maybe look into some options, just as backup? Of course I could. I found 3 venues, compared prices, negotiated a deposit. Derek's name went on the contract. Then it was the caterer, the invitations, the photographer. Every single task somehow circled back to me after Derek didn't have time or forgot to follow up or was dealing with a business opportunity. I spent my evenings after school addressing envelopes by hand because Derek said he'd design them but never did. I met with the florist on my lunch break. I created a seating chart that took into account 40 years of family drama and divorced relatives who couldn't be at the same table. Meanwhile, Derek would show up to Sunday dinners and hold forth about his vision for the party, the color scheme he'd chosen, the menu he'd selected, the timeline he'd created. All of it was my work. My parents would beam at him. "You're so thoughtful," Mom would say, "so detail-oriented." When relatives asked me about the party, I'd start to answer and Derek would smoothly take over. "Yeah, I've been working really hard on it," he'd say, and somehow I'd be edited right out of the story. Josh noticed. Of course he did. "Why are you letting him do this?" he asked one night while I addressed the 70th invitation. I didn't have a good answer, because it was easier than fighting, because they wouldn't believe me anyway, because this was just how things were. About 3 weeks before the party, Derek started saying strange things. We were at Sunday dinner and he brought up family legacy out of nowhere. "It's important to think about who really carries on the family values," he said, looking pointedly at me. "Who's actually committed to keeping this family strong?" I thought he was just being pretentious as usual, but Dad nodded seriously. "That's a very mature perspective, son." Then Derek started talking about inheritance, not subtly either. He'd make comments about how some people think they're entitled to things just because they're family, but real inheritance should go to those who embody what the family stands for. Mom would get this tight look on her face when he said these things, but she never told him to stop. I noticed my parents having a lot of closed-door conversations. They'd gone to meet with their lawyer twice in 1 month, which seemed excessive for what Mom described as updating some paperwork. When I asked if everything was okay, if they needed help with anything, Mom waved me off. "Just boring estate planning stuff, honey. Nothing for you to worry about." But I wasn't invited to any of these discussions. When Derek mentioned casually that he'd been to a meeting with the lawyer and the folks, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "I didn't know you were involved in that," I said carefully. He shrugged. "Well, somebody has to think about the practical stuff, the future of the family assets." The way he said it, like it was already decided, like it was his role and his alone. Josh noticed my anxiety ramping up. "Have they actually said anything about their will to you?" he asked. They hadn't, not a word. I'd always assumed things would be split evenly between Derek and me, the way most parents do, but now I wasn't sure. "Maybe you should ask them directly," Josh suggested. I couldn't. The one time I tried to have a real conversation with my parents, I'd been accused of being divisive and ungrateful. Asking about inheritance felt even more taboo, more mercenary. So I said nothing, and Derek kept making his comments, each one a little sharper, a little more pointed, like he knew something I didn't. The day of the party, Josh and I arrived at the country club early to make sure everything was set up correctly. Naturally, Derek was already there, schmoozing with relatives as they filtered in, playing the devoted son. I was checking on the centerpieces when Josh came up behind me, his voice low. "Emma, your brother and parents have been huddled in the corner for the past 10 minutes. Something's going on." I glanced over. Derek had his hand on Dad's shoulder and they were speaking in urgent whispers. Mom's face was pinched, uncomfortable. When she saw me looking, she immediately plastered on a smile and waved. "They're probably just going over the toast or something," I said, turning back to the flowers. Derek loves being dramatic about these things. Josh didn't move. "This isn't that. I've been watching them all evening. Every time you're nearby, they stop talking. Your dad keeps checking his phone like he's waiting for something. And Derek looks..." He paused. "He looks excited, like Christmas morning excited." I felt irritation flash through me. "Josh, can we not do this today? I know my family is weird, but it's their anniversary. Can we just get through it?" He held up his hands. "Okay, I'm sorry, but I'm telling you, something feels off. This is different than the usual golden child stuff." I wanted to believe him, but I was so tired of analyzing every family interaction, tired of feeling hurt and angry, tired of being on edge. Maybe Josh was right. Maybe something was happening. But what could I do about it? Cause a scene before the party even started? "Just stay close to me tonight," Josh said quietly. "Please, I have a really bad feeling about this." I promised I would, but honestly, I thought he was overreacting. In hindsight, Josh's instincts are better than mine have ever been. He saw the ambush coming from a mile away. I was still pretending everything was normal, right up until my brother stood up with that champagne glass and destroyed me in front of 100 people. I should have listened to Josh. I should have walked out the second he said something was wrong. The country club ballroom looked perfect. White roses and gold accents everywhere. Round tables for 10 with ivory linens. A string quartet playing softly in the corner. 100 guests milled around with champagne flutes, and everything I'd spent weeks organizing had come together beautifully. None of which anyone would attribute to me, but that was fine. That was normal. Derek was already in full performance mode when we walked in. He had a cluster of uncles laughing at some story, his hand gestures big and animated. He'd dressed well, new suit, probably bought with money from mom and dad, and his hair was perfectly styled. The prodigal son returned and radiant. Several aunts stopped him to hug him, to tell him how good he looked, how proud they were that he was getting back on his feet. I got polite smiles and, "Oh, Emma, you look nice." My parents were near the bar, greeting guests. Dad was doing his usual backslapping routine, but Mom seemed off. Her smile was tight, and she kept touching her necklace, which is what she does when she's nervous. When she saw me, something flickered across her face. Guilt? Anxiety? It was gone before I could identify it. "Emma, sweetheart," she said, kissing my cheek. "Everything looks wonderful." Not "thank you for everything," just "everything looks wonderful," as if it had magically arranged itself. Derek appeared at my elbow. "Hey, sis, glad you could make it." Like I was a casual guest and not the person who'd made this entire event happen. He clapped Josh on the shoulder with false warmth. "Josh, good to see you, man." Josh's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Derek," I felt it then, that familiar sensation of disappearing, of becoming background decoration in my own family. Guests kept approaching Derek, asking about his plans, his next venture. A few people asked me how school was going, but their eyes would drift away halfway through my answer. I was the appetizer. Derek was the main course. We took our seats at the family table, me and Josh on one side, Derek on the other with an empty chair beside him. His ex-wife hadn't come, unsurprisingly. Mom and Dad at the head, the room filled with the buzz of conversation and clinking glasses. I looked around at all these people, at the party I'd essentially thrown, and felt completely invisible. Josh squeezed my hand under the table. I squeezed back. "Just get through dinner," I told myself. "Smile, be gracious, go home." A few more hours and this would be over. Dinner was finishing up, filet mignon and salmon, both of which I'd selected after tasting 3 menus, when Dad stood and tapped his glass. "I think it's time for some toasts," he said, smiling around the room. Traditionally, the person who organized the event speaks first. That would be me. I'd even prepared something short and sweet about love and commitment and 40 years together. I was reaching for my glass when Derek stood up. Dad immediately sat back down, yielding the floor. Of course. Derek cleared his throat, and the room quieted. He had that easy charisma, that ability to command attention that I'd never possessed. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, his voice warm and confident. 40 years of marriage is incredible, and Mom and Dad are a testament to what real commitment looks like. People nodded, smiled, standard anniversary toast stuff. I started to relax, slightly. Maybe Josh had been wrong. Maybe this was just Derek being Derek, taking center stage because that's what he does. "They taught us so much growing up," Derek continued, "about loyalty, about sacrifice, about what it means to really support your family, not just when it's convenient, but when it's hard." His eyes flickered to me for just a second. My stomach tightened. "And I think as we celebrate tonight, it's important to talk about family values, about legacy, about who really embodies the principles Mom and Dad build their lives on." The room was very quiet now. Some people looked confused. Others were leaning forward, sensing drama. "Because family isn't just about blood," Derek said. "It's about who shows up, who sacrifices, who puts family first, even when they have other options." Josh's hand found mine under the table again, gripping hard. "Emma," he whispered, barely audible, "get ready." But I couldn't move. I was frozen, watching my brother's face, seeing something ugly swimming beneath his practiced smile. And then he said it, the words that would crack my entire world open. "My sister Emma has always been, well, let's be honest, the failure of the family." Derek's voice was casual, almost apologetic, like he was sharing an uncomfortable truth everyone already knew. The room went dead silent. I stopped breathing. I don't say that to be cruel, he continued, and I watched his face arrange itself into something resembling concern. But it's important to be realistic. Emma chose a career in teaching, which is fine, admirable even, but let's call it what it is: mediocre earning potential, no real advancement opportunities. She's 32 and just got engaged, which, most people figure that out earlier. My face was on fire. 100 people were staring at me. I could feel their eyes like physical pressure. And the thing is, Emma's never really contributed to this family. Not financially, not emotionally. She keeps herself separate, independent, which sounds good on paper, but really it just means she's never been there when the family needed her. I wanted to stand up, to scream, to throw my champagne glass at his smug face, but I was paralyzed, utterly frozen in my chair. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Meanwhile, I've dedicated my life to building something meaningful, Derek said. Yes, I've had setbacks. That's what happens when you actually take risks, when you try to create something bigger than yourself. Mom and Dad understood that. They invested in me because they saw potential, vision, a future. Some of Derek's friends were nodding, actually nodding along with this. So when we talk about legacy, about inheritance, about who should carry on the family name and values, he paused for effect. I think the answer is pretty clear. Mom and Dad have decided, and I agree with them, that the family estate should primarily go to someone who will actually honor it, use it properly, and that's me. He raised his glass. To Mom and Dad, thank you for believing in me, even when times were tough. Thank you for recognizing who your real investment is. I couldn't feel my hands. Josh was saying something next to me, but I couldn't hear him over the ringing in my ears. A few people were clapping uncertainly. Most looked deeply uncomfortable. My Aunt Helen's mouth was hanging open. But none of that mattered. All I could see was my brother's triumphant face, and my parents, sitting at the head of the table, neither of them standing up to stop him. Derek wasn't done. He took a sip of champagne, letting his words sink in, enjoying the attention. I know this might seem harsh to some of you, he said, his tone shifting to something patronizing, like he was explaining basic math to children. But this decision didn't come lightly. Mom, Dad, and I have had extensive conversations with the family attorney. We've looked at the numbers, at the future, at who's in the best position to manage substantial assets responsibly. He said it like it was already finalized, signed, sealed, delivered. My inheritance, or lack thereof, decided in meetings I'd never been invited to, documented in paperwork I'd never seen. Emma's made her choices, Derek continued with a little shrug. The modest apartment, the teacher's salary, the quiet life. And that's fine, that's her path. But the family home, the investments, the legacy that Mom and Dad built, that requires someone with business acumen, someone who understands wealth management and growth potential. Business acumen. From the man who'd bankrupted 3 companies. I felt the room tilting, like the floor was dropping away beneath my chair. Some guests were nodding, mostly Derek's friends, and a few relatives who'd always favored him. My cousin Brad was actually smiling, like this made perfect sense. Others looked horrified. Aunt Helen was whispering urgently to Uncle Mark. Josh's mother, sitting 3 tables away, had her hand over her mouth. But plenty of people just looked down at their plates, unwilling to get involved, unwilling to contradict the narrative Derek was spinning. So here's to Mom and Dad, Derek raised his glass higher, for making the smart choice, the right choice, for recognizing that family legacy should go to someone who will actually do something with it. A smattering of applause, not enthusiastic, but enough to validate him, enough to make this real. I finally managed to turn my head toward my parents. Dad was staring at his plate, jaw tight. And Mom? Mom's face had gone from tense to something else entirely, something cold and dangerous that I'd never seen before. Her champagne glass was gripped so hard in her hand I thought it might shatter. Before I could find my voice, before Josh could pull me out of there, before anyone could react at all, my mother stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. Every eye in the room shifted to her. Patricia's face was ice, not the tight, uncomfortable expression from earlier, not the nervous smile or the guilty flicker. This was something else entirely, something I'd never seen on my mother's face in 32 years. Pure, cold fury. "That's interesting, Derek," she said. Her voice cut through the ballroom like a blade. "That's very interesting, because that's not what my will says." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Derek's face drained of color. All that confidence, that smugness, evaporated in an instant. "Mom," he started. "Sit down," Patricia said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a yell. But Derek sat. Immediately. Like a puppet with cut strings. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. What was happening? "I'm sorry everyone had to witness that," Mom continued, her eyes sweeping across the guests. "But I think it's important, given what my son just announced to a room full of people, that we clear up some confusion." Dad had gone pale beside her. "Patricia," he said quietly, warningly. She ignored him completely. "Derek, you said you've had extensive conversations with me and the family attorney. That's partially true. You've had conversations with your father. But you see, our assets aren't joint. My inheritance from my parents, the properties I brought into this marriage, my personal investments, those are mine. And my will is my decision." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The room was frozen, everyone transfixed by the spectacle unfolding. "And I changed it," Patricia said, each word crisp and clear. 3 months ago, without telling anyone, she turned to look directly at me. Something in her expression cracked, just slightly. "Emma is my primary beneficiary, not Derek." The world stopped spinning. I felt Josh's hand tighten around mine so hard it hurt. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "And Derek?" Derek looked like he'd been slapped. My mother wasn't finished. She picked up her water glass, took a deliberate sip, and continued like she was discussing the weather. 3 months ago, I met with my attorney. Alone. I revised my entire estate plan. Emma receives the family home, my investment portfolio, and the bulk of my assets. Derek receives a trust fund, a small one, with very specific conditions attached to its distribution. Derek made a strangled sound. "You can't. That's not." "I absolutely can," Patricia said. "And I did. I've spent the past 3 months documenting everything. Every time your father wrote you another check, every time you showed up late or demanded something or complained about your sister, every conversation where you called Emma selfish while living rent-free in our house." Her voice was getting harder now, sharper. "I documented the favoritism I allowed your father to perpetuate for 35 years, the way we funded your failures while Emma funded herself, the way we made excuses for you while expecting Emma to simply manage without support. People were staring openly now, some with their phones out. This was going to be all over social media by morning. I didn't care. I couldn't process what I was hearing. I watched Emma become independent and successful despite being overlooked," Mom continued. "I watched you become entitled and irresponsible because you were overindulged. And I realized that the worst thing I could do as a mother was continue enabling the imbalance." She turned back to Derek and her expression was withering. "So I decided to run a test. I told you and your father that we were planning to make you the primary beneficiary. I wanted to see what you would do with that information, how you would behave." Derek's face was red now, rage replacing shock. "You tested me, and you failed spectacularly," Patricia said. "Congratulations, Derek. You just humiliated your sister at your parents' anniversary party based on a lie I fed you to see if you'd prove me right about your character." She sat down, smoothing her dress. "You did?" Patricia wasn't finished explaining. The room remained silent, captivated by the unraveling family drama. "I need you all to understand something," she said, her voice quieter now, but no less intense. "I'm not blameless here. I let this happen. For decades, I watched my husband pour money and attention into Derek while Emma learned to expect nothing. I told myself it was because Derek needed more help, that Emma was fine on her own. She looked at me and I saw tears in her eyes for the first time. But Emma wasn't fine. She was neglected. She was overlooked. And she learned to make herself small and undemanding because that was the only way to survive in this family without constant disappointment. My throat was tight. I couldn't speak. I watched you put yourself through graduate school, Mom said to me. I watched you buy your own car, your own apartment. I watched you build a beautiful life and career with no help from us. And instead of being proud, instead of celebrating you, we acted like your independence was a character flaw, like you were being distant or difficult. She turned back to the room. 3 months ago, I was at Emma's school for a community event. I saw her with her students, saw how they lit up around her, how she'd clearly changed their lives, and I realized my daughter had become an extraordinary woman in spite of her family, not because of us. Derek was shaking his head, his face twisted. This is insane. You can't just... I told you 6 weeks ago about the will change. Patricia cut him off. I said your father and I had decided to make you the primary beneficiary. I watched what you did with that information, the comments about legacy, the subtle digs at Emma, and then tonight, this performance. She gestured around the room. You couldn't just accept good fortune quietly. You had to destroy your sister publicly to justify why you deserved it more. Her voice dropped. You proved exactly why you don't. Derek exploded out of his chair so violently it tipped backward and crashed to the floor. This is bullshit! He screamed, his face purple with rage. She manipulated you. Emma and that boyfriend of hers got in your head, turned you against your own son. He was pointing at me, shaking, spit flying from his mouth. I have sacrificed everything for this family while she sat back and judged us. And now you're rewarding her for what? For being cold? For abandoning us? People were standing now, backing away, the celebration completely destroyed. Dad finally found his voice. Patricia, what is he talking about? You changed the will without discussing it with me? His face was white with shock. He genuinely hadn't known. Mom turned to him, and her expression was devastating. Yes, Robert, without you. Because you're as much the problem as he is. You've enabled Derek's behavior for 35 years. Every failed business, every tantrum, every time he blamed someone else for his problems, you wrote a check and told him he was right. You created this. Dad recoiled like he'd been slapped. I'm also filing for divorce, Mom said, her voice steady despite the chaos. I'm 62 years old and I'm done. Done watching you destroy our son with your indulgence. Done being complicit in how we treated our daughter. Done with all of it. The room erupted. Aunt Helen was crying. Derek was still screaming, calling me a manipulative bitch, calling Josh a snake, calling Mom a crazy, vindictive woman. Dad sat down heavily, his face in his hands. Other relatives were trying to calm Derek down, or fleeing toward the exits, or filming everything on their phones. It was an absolute disaster, a mushroom cloud of family dysfunction detonating in real time, and I just sat there, Josh's arm around me, watching my entire family implode in the middle of a country club ballroom while 100 people bore witness. Derek stormed out, still screaming obscenities, and Dad scrambled after him, calling his name. Several relatives followed, Cousin Brad, Uncle Tom, who'd always thought Derek was brilliant, a handful of Dad's golf buddies who'd watched Derek grow up and couldn't reconcile this version with the golden boy they remembered. Aunt Carol, Dad's sister, shot Mom a look of pure disgust before sweeping out with her husband. The party fractured down invisible fault lines I hadn't known existed. About half the guests made awkward excuses and fled, unable or unwilling to be part of this mess. The other half stayed, mostly Mom's side of the family and a few brave souls who seemed too stunned to move. The string quartet had stopped playing at some point. Waiters stood frozen with trays of untouched dessert. I couldn't feel my body. I was aware of Josh's arm around me, of his voice saying something soothing, but I couldn't process words. My mother had just blown up her marriage, disinherited my brother, and named me her primary beneficiary in front of 100 people. My brother had called me a failure. My father hadn't defended me once. Mom walked over to our table. She moved slowly, like she'd aged a decade in the past 10 minutes. When she reached me, she knelt down beside my chair, actually knelt, and took my hands in hers. "Emma," she said, and her voice cracked, "I am so, so sorry for all of it, for every time I looked away while you were treated as lesser, for every time I made excuses for your brother and your father instead of protecting you, for letting you believe for 32 years that you weren't enough." Tears were streaming down her face now. "You were always enough. You were always more than enough, and I failed you as a mother by not showing you that every single day." Something broke open in my chest. I started crying, really crying, years of suppressed hurt pouring out. Mom pulled me into her arms, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like my mother was actually seeing me, really seeing me. Josh's hand was on my back. Mom was whispering apologies, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the country club staff quietly starting to clean up the ruins of the party. The weeks after the anniversary party were surreal. Derek and Dad hired a lawyer, an expensive one, from what I heard through the family grapevine, to contest Mom's will. They claimed she wasn't of sound mind, that Josh and I had manipulated her, that the whole thing was elder abuse. Their attorney sent threatening letters. Mom's attorney sent back documentation, 3 months of recorded conversations, bank statements showing the pattern of payments to Derek, emails where Mom had expressed concerns about the favoritism that Dad had dismissed. The will was ironclad. Mom had been meticulous. I blocked Derek's number after the 15th voicemail calling me a conniving bitch. Blocked Dad's too, after he left a message saying I'd destroyed this family and should be ashamed. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. Mom filed for divorce the week after the party. She moved in with her sister Linda 2 hours away, and from what she told me in our weekly phone calls, she'd never been happier. "I should have done this 20 years ago," she said. "I feel like I can finally breathe." The family split like a cell dividing. Dad's side rallied around him, and Derek, painting Mom as a vindictive crazy woman, having some kind of breakdown. Mom's side was more divided. Some supported her. Others thought she'd handled it badly, even if Derek deserved it. Aunt Helen called me crying, apologizing for not speaking up sooner, saying she'd watched the favoritism for years and felt guilty for staying silent. A few cousins reached out with support. Others unfriended me on social media. Josh and I postponed our wedding. Not cancelled, postponed. We'd planned it for 6 months out, but neither of us could stomach the idea of navigating that minefield right now. Who would we invite? Would Mom come? Would Dad show up and cause a scene? It felt impossible. "We'll do it when things calm down," Josh said. "When you're ready." I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. I wasn't sure things would ever calm down, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to force peace where there wasn't any. 6 months later, I'm in therapy twice a week. Turns out, 32 years of being gaslit by your family leaves some damage that doesn't heal overnight. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, has helped me understand something crucial. I spent my whole life thinking I was the problem, the failure, the one who couldn't earn their love because I wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't successful enough, wasn't enough, period. But I was never the failure. I was the success story they couldn't control. I'm low contact with most of my family now. Dad sends occasional emails that I don't read. Derek's lawyer still sends letters that my lawyer handles. I have coffee with Mom every other week. She's different now, lighter, more honest. She tells me stories about her own mother, about patterns that go back generations. We're both learning how to break them. The inheritance isn't finalized yet. Divorce, and estate battles take time, but mom's assured me it's secure. I've already decided what I'll do with it. Part of it goes toward the life Josh and I are building. We're getting married next spring. Small ceremony, just people who actually love us. The rest, I'm creating a fund for my classroom and others like it. Art supplies, field trips, resources for kids whose families can't afford extras, giving students what I never got from my family. Unconditional support. Josh says I'm thriving. Some days I believe him. Some days I still hear Derek's voice calling me a failure in front of 100 people, but those days are getting fewer. Here's what I know now. My brother was right about one thing. I am different from them. I don't measure my worth by how much money I can extract from people who love me. I don't think cruelty is justified by desperation. I don't believe family means accepting abuse to keep the peace. So let me ask you this, because I'm still working through it myself. Was my mom's test cruel, or was it necessary? Did she manipulate Derek into showing his true colors, or did she finally hold up a mirror he'd been avoiding his whole life? Did I go too far by accepting the inheritance, or not far enough by still speaking to her at all? I genuinely want to know what you think.